Did you know that the house used in the Amityville Horror was a real place where something truly terrible happened, and the actors who walked through its doors said they felt something strange the moment they stepped inside? This movie was not just a story someone made up. It was based on real events that scared an entire family out of their home. And the making of this film was just as strange as the story itself. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about the Amityville Horror. Number 20. The real house had a dark history before the movie even began, before one camera was turned on, before one actor memorized a single line, before the director even had a finished script. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York, was already famous for something horrifying. In November of 1974, a young man named Ronald DeFeo Jr. walked through that house in the middle of the night and shot and killed 6 members of his own family. His parents, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters were all found dead in their beds. The neighbors heard nothing. The community was shaken to its core. DeFeo later claimed that voices inside the house had told him to do it. Whether that was true or not, no one could say for certain. But the story spread fast. When the Lutz family moved into that same house just over a year later, in December of 1975, they lasted only 28 days before running out and never returning. They described doors ripping off hinges, green slime oozing from walls, clouds of flies appearing from nowhere, and a feeling of pure evil filling every room. George Lutz said he woke up at 3:15 every morning, the same time the murders had happened. The family wrote a book about their experience, and that book became the foundation for the movie. So when audiences sat in dark theaters in 1979 and watched this film, they were not watching a simple ghost story. They were watching something that had roots in real blood, real grief, and real fear. The history of the house did not stay in the past. It traveled right through the screen and into the audience's hearts. What looked like a haunted house movie was built on something painfully real. Number 19. The book came first, and it was a massive hit before the movie. There was a book. J. Anson wrote a book called The Amityville Horror, A True Story, and it was published in 1977. People picked it up expecting a chilling ghost story. What they got felt much more unsettling because it was presented as something that actually happened. Anson based his writing on recorded interviews with George and Kathy Lutz. He spent hours listening to them describe what they experienced inside the house, the cold spots, the strange visions, the demonic pig with glowing red eyes, the figure of a hooded creature, and the feeling that something was always watching. The book flew off shelves faster than anyone expected. It became one of the best-selling nonfiction horror books in American history. Readers across the country were terrified. Some read it in one night and then refused to turn off the lights for days. Libraries reported long waiting lists. People who did not even enjoy scary stories were picking it up because they heard it was real. By the time the book reached its peak popularity, it had sold millions of copies and sparked national debates about whether ghosts were real, whether the Lutz family was telling the truth, and whether evil could actually live inside a building. Producers in Hollywood noticed. They saw that audiences were hungry for this story, not just curious, but emotionally invested in it. And so the decision was made to bring the book to the big screen. The film had a massive built-in audience before a single frame was shot. The book had already done half the work. It had already planted fear in millions of hearts. All the movie had to do was show people what they had already imagined in their minds. Number 18. The movie was made on a surprisingly small budget. Here is something that surprises most people when they hear it. The Amityville Horror was not a big-budget Hollywood production. It was made for around $6 million, which even by 1979 standards was considered modest for a major horror film. The producers were working with limited resources, and they had to make smart choices every single day on set. They could not afford long shooting schedules, expensive special effects, or elaborate set builds. Everything had to be done with creativity and careful planning. Despite this, the film went on to earn over $86 million at the box office worldwide. That made it one of the most profitable horror films of its era. For every dollar spent, the film earned back more than 14. Think about that for a moment. A small, tightly budgeted production that nearly every major studio had passed on became one of the biggest horror hits of the decade. The people who believed in it, who scraped together funding and took the risk, were rewarded in a way they probably never fully expected. The success of the Amityville Horror proved something important to the film industry. Audiences were hungry for real-feeling horror. They did not need giant explosions or computer-generated monsters. They needed something that felt true, something that felt close to home. And this film, made with modest means and genuine passion, delivered exactly that. Small budget. Massive fear. The numbers told the whole story. Number 17. The director had never made a horror film before Stuart Rosenberg was chosen to direct the Amityville Horror, and here is the surprising part. He was not a horror director at all. He was known for serious dramas and crime films. His most famous work before this was Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman, a movie about a rebellious prisoner in the American South. That film had nothing to do with ghosts, demons, or supernatural terror. So when Rosenberg was handed this project, many people in the industry raised their eyebrows. Could a drama director really handle horror? Could someone who had never built that kind of tension, that specific kind of dread, pull it off? Rosenberg approached the material seriously. He did not treat it like a cheap monster movie. He treated it like a real story about a real family falling apart under unimaginable pressure. He focused on the human relationships, on George and Kathy Lutz and their children, and let the horror grow around them naturally. That approach turned out to be the right one. By grounding the story in family dynamics and emotional reality, Rosenberg made the supernatural elements feel more believable. Audiences connected with the characters before the scares arrived, and when the scares did arrive, they landed harder because the audience actually cared. A drama director made a horror classic. He did not use the usual horror tricks. He used something simpler and more powerful. He used heart. Number 16. James Brolin almost did not get the role of George Lutz. James Brolin was not the first choice to play George Lutz. Several actors were considered for the lead role, and the casting process was more complicated than most people realize. Producers wanted someone who could carry the emotional weight of the story, someone who could start the film as a loving, confident husband and father, and, slowly, convincingly, unravel into something frightening and unrecognizable. Brolin read for the role and immediately impressed the team. But what sealed the deal was something almost accidental. During his preparation for the audition, Brolin picked up the book written by Jay Anson and began reading it at home one evening. He later said that while he was reading, strange things began happening around him. A trouser fell off a hanger with no apparent cause, the lights flickered, and he felt an unexplained chill move through the room. Whether these things were coincidences or something else entirely, Brolin took them as a sign that he was meant to play this role. He walked into that audition with a different energy, a genuine unease that the producers could feel. His performance carried that unease throughout the entire film. There were moments when Brolin's eyes told the story before a single word was spoken. His slow transformation from warm and loving to hollow and terrifying was one of the most memorable parts of the film. He was not just acting. He was channeling something. That trouser falling from its hanger may have been the most important moment in his career. Number 15. Margot Kidder brought raw emotion to every scene. Margot Kidder played Kathy Lutz, and she brought something deeply personal to the role. Kidder was already known to audiences at the time because she had played Lois Lane in Superman, released just the year before. But Kathy Lutz was a completely different kind of character. A mother, A wife? A woman trying desperately to hold her family together while something dark and invisible pulled it apart. Kidder prepared for the role by spending time thinking about what it would truly feel like to be in Kathy's situation. She was not just playing a woman scared of ghosts. She was playing a woman watching someone she loved change into a stranger. She was playing the terror of helplessness, of not being able to protect your children, not being able to reach your husband, not being able to explain what was happening to the people around you. Kidder threw herself into every scene with complete commitment. There were moments during filming where her emotional reactions were so raw and so honest that the crew fell silent on set. Directors sometimes call this kind of performance a gift, when an actor gives you something you could never have planned or rehearsed. Kidder gave that gift again and again throughout production. Her tears were real. Her panic was real. Her love for the children on screen felt completely genuine. The audience believed her completely, and that belief made everything scarier. What looked like perfect acting was often something much deeper than that. Number 14. The famous Amityville house was not actually used for filming. Here is a fact that surprises almost everyone who hears it. The famous house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York, the actual house where the DeFeo murders happened and where the Lutz family lived, was not used for filming. The real house still existed. It was still standing. But the owners refused to allow a film crew anywhere near it. They wanted nothing to do with the movie, so the production team did what film crews always do when the real location is unavailable. They found something close enough. They scouted multiple locations and eventually settled on a house in Toms River, New Jersey. The house in New Jersey was redesigned and modified to closely match the exterior of the Amityville house. The famous quarter-round windows that looked like eyes on the upper floor, perhaps the most recognizable feature of the house, were recreated on the New Jersey property. The crew also built interior sets on a soundstage in California to capture the inside of the house. This combination of a real exterior location in New Jersey and a constructed interior set in California created the complete world of the film. Most viewers watching at home had no idea they were looking at two different places. The illusion was seamless. The real house stood quietly in New York while its double performed on screen. Two houses. One legend. Number 13. The production was plagued with trouble from the very beginning. People who worked on the Amityville Horror have shared stories over the years about strange and unsettling things that happened during production. These were not elaborate tales told to promote the movie. Many of them were shared quietly, almost reluctantly, by crew members who were not sure what to make of what they had experienced. Equipment would malfunction for no clear reason. Lights would flicker on set when everything had been checked and should have been working perfectly. Unexplained cold spots were reported in certain areas of the soundstage, even when the temperature everywhere else was normal. Some crew members reported waking up repeatedly at 3:15 in the morning, the same time that the DeFeo murders had taken place, without any alarm clock, without any obvious reason. James Brolin himself reported experiencing several unsettling moments during production. Whether these stories were genuine paranormal experiences or simply the overactive imaginations of people working on a deeply creepy project, nobody could say for certain. But the frequency of the reports was hard to ignore. The director and producers mostly stayed quiet on the subject. They had a film to finish. But the stories traveled from set to set, person to person, until they became a kind of legend of their own, a behind-the-scenes haunting to match the haunting on screen. What should have been a normal film shoot felt like anything but. Number 12. Lalo Schifrin composed the score, and it was originally even scarier. The music of the Amityville Horror is one of its most powerful and unforgettable elements. The score was composed by Lalo Schifrin, a legendary musician who had previously created the iconic theme for Mission Impossible. Schifrin had a gift for building tension through music, for using rhythm, tone, and unexpected silences to make audiences feel deeply uncomfortable before anything had even appeared on screen. For the Amityville Horror, Schifrin created a score that felt like something was breathing just below the surface of every scene. The music seemed to pulse with a low, organic energy, not sharp jump-scare stings, but long, creeping notes that made your skin feel tight. What most people do not know is that Schifrin's original score was even darker and more intense than what ended up in the final film. The producers felt that some of Schifrin's compositions were almost too disturbing, that they pushed the audience past fear and into something closer to genuine distress. Some cues were altered, some were replaced or softened. The version that reached theaters was still deeply effective, but it was a moderated version of what Schifrin had originally created. His full original vision was more extreme, more relentless, more unsettling than most people ever heard. Imagine that. The score in the finished film was already legendary, and somewhere out there was a version that went even further. The music told the story without words, and the words it was whispering were not comforting ones. Number 11. The film sparked a massive debate about truth and fiction when the Amityville Horror was released in the summer of 1979. It did not just scare people. It started a conversation that went far beyond movie theaters. The film was marketed as being based on a true story, and that claim sent ripples through newspapers, television programs, churches, and scientific communities across America. Parapsychologists took sides. Religious leaders weighed in. Skeptics published long articles arguing that the Lutz family had fabricated everything. Believers wrote letters to newspapers sharing their own experiences with unexplained phenomena. Lawyers got involved too. DeFeo's attorney, William Weber, who had represented Ronald DeFeo Jr., later claimed that he and the Lutz family had invented much of the story together over wine one night, hoping to make money from the account. The Lutz family strongly denied this. George and Kathy Lutz maintained until their dying days that what they experienced in that house was real. The debate never fully settled. And that unresolved quality, that lingering question of whether it was truth or elaborate fiction, followed the movie everywhere it went. It made the film more than entertainment. It made it a cultural flashpoint. People who might never have gone to see a regular horror movie went because they needed to know. Was it real? Could something like this actually happen? The theater became a place to wrestle with those questions, and the film was smart enough never to fully answer them. It left the door open. Just a crack. Number 10. The movie was released strategically during the summer, and it paid off. In the world of Hollywood, timing is everything. When the Amityville Horror was released on July 27, 1979, the choice to open in summer was very deliberate. Just 4 years earlier, Jaws had proven that summer was no longer just for light-hearted entertainments. A terrifying, gripping, expertly made thriller could absolutely dominate the summer box office. The producers of the Amityville Horror wanted a piece of that energy. They believed their film could speak to the same hunger for fear that Jaws had satisfied. They were right. The film opened strongly in its first weekend and continued to perform well over the following weeks. Word of mouth was powerful. People who saw it told their friends. Groups went together, then came out shaken, then told everyone they knew. The summer heat outside the theater made the chill inside feel even more dramatic by contrast. Audiences who walked into air-conditioned theaters on warm July evenings walked out looking over their shoulders. The timing matched the mood perfectly. Horror in the summertime created a special kind of fear, not the cozy, firelit fear of October, but something rawer and more exposed. The bright summer sun outside made the darkness inside the movie feel more surprising, more wrong. Summer was supposed to be safe. This film reminded audiences that no season could protect them from what lived in that house. Number 9. The sequels and remakes that followed changed the legacy of the original. The success of the Amityville Horror in 1979 opened a door that Hollywood was very happy to walk through again and again. The franchise that grew from this one film became one of the longest and most sprawling in horror history. Amityville 2, The Possession, arrived in 1982, serving as a prequel that dramatized the DeFeo murders. Amityville 3D followed in 1983. Then came a string of direct-to-video sequels throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, many of which had almost nothing to do with the original story but used the famous name to attract audiences. A major Hollywood remake was released in 2005, starring Ryan Reynolds as George Lutz. That remake introduced the story to a new generation but also sparked renewed comparisons to the original. Most reviewers and fans agreed that the 1979 version had an atmosphere and an authenticity that the remake could not quite replicate. The original film had something the remake did not: the weight of genuine public belief. People in 1979 were not entirely sure the story was fiction. By 2005, that uncertainty had largely faded. The original film existed at a unique moment in cultural history, a moment when the line between horror and reality felt dangerously thin. That moment could not be recreated. It could only be remembered. Number 8. Rod Steiger's performance as Father Delaney was almost completely improvised. Rod Steiger played Father Delaney, the priest who visits the Amityville house and experiences something terrifying that leaves him physically weakened and spiritually shattered. Steiger was an Academy Award-winning actor with a reputation for intense, deeply committed performances. He brought that same intensity to this role, and many of his most memorable moments in the film were not rigidly scripted. Steiger was given considerable freedom to interpret his scenes, and he used that freedom to create something raw and unpredictable. The scene where Father Delaney is assaulted by flies inside the house, a moment that audiences found genuinely disturbing, was enhanced enormously by Steiger's physical and emotional reaction. He did not just swat at the insects. He reacted with his whole body, his whole face, his whole spirit. He made the audience feel what the priest was feeling, not just disgust, but the shattering of a deeply held faith. Steiger later spoke about how seriously he took the spiritual dimension of the role. He believed that Father Delaney's story was about a man whose understanding of the world was torn apart by something he could not explain within the boundaries of his religion. That depth of interpretation, that philosophical weight, elevated what could have been a simple side character into one of the film's most haunting presences. He was not just fighting flies. He was fighting the collapse of everything he believed. Number 7. The famous quarter-round windows were a deliberate visual choice. If you have ever seen a photograph of the Amityville house, the real one or the one used in the film, you have probably noticed those distinctive quarter-round windows on the upper floor. They look like eyes. Wide, dark, watching eyes set into the front of the house. This was not accidental. Those windows existed on the original house at 112 Ocean Avenue, and when the production team recreated the exterior for filming in New Jersey, they made absolutely certain those windows were faithfully reproduced. The decision was purely psychological. A house that looks like a face, a house with eyes, creates an instinctive reaction in human beings. We are wired to look for faces. We evolved to detect the gaze of other creatures because being watched could mean danger. When we see a structure that resembles a face looking back at us, our brains respond with a low, automatic unease. The filmmakers understood this. The house itself became a character because of those windows. Every exterior shot that included the upper floor felt like the house was watching the characters and watching the audience. Cinematographer Fred J. Kennekamp framed shots to take full advantage of this effect, often catching the windows at angles that emphasized their resemblance to a pair of cold, inhuman eyes. The house did not need to move or speak. Those windows said everything. They said, "I see you. And I have been waiting." Number 6. The real George Lutz remained haunted by the experience for the rest of his life. George Lutz, the real man at the center of this story, did not simply walk away from the Amityville experience and get on with his life. The events of those 28 days in the house, whatever their true nature, followed him for decades. He gave interviews throughout the 1980s and 90s, consistently maintaining that what his family experienced was genuine. He was not selling a product. He was not trying to generate attention. By the time most people had moved on from the story, George Lutz was still living with it. He reported that the experiences did not entirely stop after the family left the house. He described lingering feelings, strange dreams, and a persistent sense of unease that never fully went away. He became deeply involved in the legal battles over the story's ownership, fighting in court over who had the right to tell the Amityville story and how it should be told. He consulted on various film and television projects related to the events. He was a constant, present voice in the ongoing conversation about what had happened. George Lutz died in May of 2006 at the age of 59. He never recanted his account. He never admitted the story was invented. Whatever the truth of the Amityville Horror, real, exaggerated, or entirely fabricated, George Lutz carried it to his grave with the full weight of a man who believed every word of it. Number 5. The film helped define the haunted house genre for a generation before the Amityville Horror. Haunted house movies existed, but they had a certain theatrical, old-fashioned quality. They often featured aristocratic settings, Gothic architecture, and characters who seemed somewhat removed from everyday life. The haunted houses of classic Hollywood were not places that regular people lived. They were mansions, castles, ancient estates. They belonged to another world. The Amityville Horror changed that. The house at the center of this story was not a castle. It was a large but ordinary American home in a suburban neighborhood. It had a garage, a yard, a boathouse, a staircase that any viewer could recognize. The family inside was not royalty or nobility. They were a working-class couple with 3 children trying to make a fresh start. They had bought the house at a reduced price because of its dark history. They were doing what millions of American families dreamed of doing, getting more house for less money, moving into a better neighborhood, building a better life. The horror that entered their home felt terrifyingly close to home for audiences. This was not someone else's problem in someone else's world. This was next door. This was familiar. This was possible. The film turned the American suburban dream into a nightmare, and in doing so, it permanently expanded what a haunted house story could be. After Amityville, haunted houses in movies looked like places you had actually been. That was the most frightening thing of all. Number 4. The crew used real flies in the priest's scene, and it was chaos. The scene where Father Delaney is trapped in a room with a swarm of flies is one of the most viscerally uncomfortable moments in the entire film. And the reason it feels so genuinely horrible is simple. Those were real flies. The production team sourced a large number of live flies for the sequence, intending to use them in a controlled way to create the atmosphere of the scene. What happened was anything but controlled. Flies, as it turns out, do not follow a director's instructions. They do not hit their marks. They do not respect the boundaries of a set. Once released, the flies went everywhere, into the equipment, onto the food, in the catering area, into the hair and clothing of crew members. The set became genuinely unpleasant for everyone working on it, not just the actor in the middle of the scene. Rod Steiger, already deeply committed to his performance, found that the real flies actually helped him. He did not have to pretend to be disturbed. He was disturbed. The revulsion on his face was not manufactured. It was genuine. After the shoot, the crew spent considerable time trying to clear the set. The flies had no interest in leaving. What was supposed to be a controlled film effect became a small ecological crisis on a soundstage. It looked easy in the script. On the day, it was complete chaos. Number 3. The film's ending was changed multiple times before the final cut. The ending of the Amityville Horror, as audiences saw it in theaters, was not the first ending that was filmed. The production went through multiple versions of the film's conclusion before settling on what appeared on screen. Early cuts of the film apparently included scenes that were considered either too extreme for general audiences or not emotionally satisfying enough to close the story properly. Test screenings were held, and audience reactions were carefully studied. Some viewers felt that certain endings moved too quickly. Others felt that the supernatural elements in alternate cuts were too explicit, that showing too much destroyed the power of what had been carefully left to the imagination throughout the rest of the film. The final ending, in which the Lutz family escapes from the house in a frantic and desperate rush, pursued by something dark and relentless, was chosen because it felt the most emotionally complete. It honored the reality of the story. The family did not defeat the evil. They did not destroy it or banish it. They simply ran. They survived by leaving. That choice was thematically powerful and historically accurate. The real Lutz family ran. They left their belongings behind. They never went back. The film's ending honored that truth. Sometimes the only way to survive is to stop fighting and simply flee. That was a harder and more honest ending than most horror films were willing to give their audiences. Number 2. The Amityville Horror influenced an entire generation of horror filmmakers. The impact of the Amityville Horror on the world of horror filmmaking is enormous and still visible today. Directors, writers, and producers who were young when the film was released in 1979 have spoken about it as a formative experience, one of the films that made them want to work in horror. James Wan, who directed The Conjuring, has cited the Amityville Horror as an important influence on his approach to supernatural horror. The Conjuring itself was connected to the Amityville story through the real-life paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, who investigated the Amityville house and later appeared in a documentary about it. The idea of grounding supernatural horror in the domestic world, in the spaces of family life, in bedrooms and kitchens and staircases, traces a clear line back to what the Amityville Horror established. Modern haunted house films like Insidious, Sinister, and The Haunting of Hill House on television all carry Dina from that original 1979 film. The formula of a family in a house, slowly realizing that something ancient and malevolent has been there all along, that formula was not invented by Amityville, but it was crystallized and perfected by it in a way that permanently shaped the genre. Every haunted house film made since 1979 exists in the shadow of that house with the watching windows. Whether the filmmakers know it or not, they are still telling the same story. Number 1. The Amityville Horror changed the way Americans thought about home. The most powerful and lasting legacy of the Amityville Horror is not a box office number or a casting choice or a clever camera angle. It is something much deeper and more personal than any of those things. This film, this strange, troubled, compelling, imperfect film, permanently changed the way millions of Americans thought about the concept of home. Home is supposed to be safety. It is supposed to be the one place in the world where you are protected from everything dark and threatening outside. The walls of your home are supposed to keep danger away. Your family inside those walls is supposed to be unreachable by the cruelty of the world. The Amityville Horror took that belief and turned it inside out. It said, what if the danger is not outside? What if it is already in there with you? What if the walls that are supposed to protect you are actually trapping you with something you cannot see and cannot fight? That question resonated with audiences on a level that went far beyond entertainment. It touched something primal. It spoke to a fear that lives in every human heart, the fear that the places we love most, the people we trust most, the life we have built most carefully, can still be taken from us by forces we do not understand. The film did not resolve that fear. It honored it. It named it. And in naming it, it gave millions of people a way to sit with their darkest anxieties and come out the other side, shaken, yes, but somehow braver for having faced them in the dark. Not just a horror film. a mirror held up to the most frightened part of being human. Bonus fact: the secret that most fans never heard. There is one story from the production of the Amityville Horror that very few people outside the original crew have ever talked about publicly. It involves a decision made during the final stages of post-production that almost nobody outside the editing room ever knew about. When the film was in its final cut, the editor and director faced a specific problem. There was a sequence in the middle of the film where the supernatural activity in the house was meant to escalate dramatically, a turning point where the audience should feel that everything had changed, that the family was now truly trapped. Multiple scenes had been shot for this sequence. Different approaches had been tried. Some used explicit visual effects. Others used sound design alone. Some relied entirely on the actors' reactions to communicate what was happening. None of them worked the way the filmmakers hoped. The explicit effects felt too theatrical. The pure sound approach felt incomplete. The reaction-based version felt too understated for the moment the story needed. In the end, a young editor working on the film suggested something simple. He said, "Show nothing. Cut to black for just a moment longer than the audience expects. Then cut directly to the aftermath." The human brain, he argued, would fill that darkness with something far more terrifying than anything the production could afford to create or anything the actors could perform. The imagination, given just enough information and then left in the dark for a fraction of a second longer than is comfortable, generates its own horror. Personal, specific, individual horror that is worse than anything a filmmaker can put on screen. The director listened. He tried it. He looked at the cut. And he kept it. That small black moment, that tiny space of nothing, became one of the most effective passages in the film. Audiences felt it without understanding why. They leaned forward. They held their breath. They filled the darkness themselves. The budget could not buy what that silence created. No special effect could match what the audience's own mind produced in that fraction of a second. It was the oldest trick in storytelling, not showing but suggesting, not explaining but implying, trusting the audience enough to let them do the work. One empty frame, one deliberate silence, one small choice that nobody talked about for decades. Old tools. New magic. The Amityville Horror is more than a scary movie from the 1970s. It is a story about what happens when the places we trust most are no longer safe. It is about family, about trying to hold the people you love together when everything around you is pulling them apart. It is about fear, yes, but it is also about courage. The courage to run when running is the only honest thing left to do. The people who made this film, the director who had never made horror before, the actors who felt genuine unease on set, the composer whose music breathed with dark life, the crew members who woke at 3:15 in the morning and did not know why, they all brought something real to this project. Whether the story behind the film was true or not, the emotions inside it are completely genuine, and that is why the film still works today, almost 50 years later. Because fear is timeless. And the need for home, for safety, for family, for a place where the darkness cannot reach you, is the most human need of all. Thank you for spending this time uncovering the hidden stories behind one of horror's most enduring mysteries. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we will keep uncovering them one story at a time.